Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 133 of the Citrix session. I'm your host, Bill Sutton. Today, Andy Whiteside is unavailable for this one, so we're gonna carry on without him. With me, as usual, I have Todd Smith and Geremy Meyers from the Cloud Software Group, aka Citrix. Todd, you want to say hello?
Hey, good day, and thanks for having us here today, Bill. We do miss Andy, but it's great to have you as a fill-in host for this.
Thank you, Todd. Yeah, we do miss Andy for sure. Geremy, you want to say hello?
Good morning, good afternoon, actually, right? So,
Yeah, barely.
how you guys doing? Bill, I got to see you last week in Chicago. Todd,
Yep.
One of these days. I guess I get to see you here in about a month, won't I?
Yeah, down in Orlando.
That'll be fun. That'll be fun.
Yeah, it was good seeing you, Geremy. I'm actually, as soon as we're finished with this recording the podcast, I'm actually headed to Huntersville. I think I will see you tomorrow as well at one of our Blueprint dinners or lunches.
That is right. I will be there. I will be there. In fact, I will be tag teaming the presentations. I'll be doing the Citrix presentation.
Very good.
So that'll be fun. Okay.
Definitely. So we settled today on a blog article. It's entitled Accelerate Your Hybrid Strategy with Citrix and Nutanix Cloud Clusters on Azure, written by Calvin Sue. This is timely for some of us. Geremy, as he mentioned, and I were at the Nutanix.next conference out in Chicago last week, and this was one of the topics of the conference, talking about NC2 as Nutanix often refers to it. So this we'll just jump right into it. Geremy, you want to start us off, kick us off?
Yeah. So first of all, it was really good being in Chicago last week. So, I mean, I've been working with the Citrix on Nutanix stack for a while. I think we have a lot of parallels as the two companies. So, I think we kind of both lean into, hybrid computing is where a lot of customers are going to end up landing, right? So, I think Todd will tell you, Bill, you've probably seen this firsthand. We have a lot of customers who were on premises, so to speak. And when investigating, leveraging the cloud, look to just lift and shift, move everything to the cloud. And then I guess what they found out is maybe on some levels it cost too much. On some levels, just the application architecture didn't make sense. But for whatever reason they chose, they decided that they're going to have a mix between on-premise, cloud, and in some cases, multiple clouds. Ultimately, things are going to have to live wherever they live.
Right.
The business is going to drive a lot of that. And so, ultimately, that was kind of the whole, that was a lot of the messaging around Nutanix Next last week. That's been the messaging around, the Citrix business unit for, several months now. So it was kind of interesting to see the combination. So I think what this blog post does is really talk about where, Citrix is headed. So Calvin Sue is, one of the principal, he's the director of, product marketing for the Citrix BU, where we're headed and how that sort of connects with where Nutanix is headed. And ultimately, what they're doing here and extending out their cloud clusters to Azure, which is pretty slick, actually.
Yeah, and Geremy, to your point about the customers being either apprehensive or limited as to their move to the cloud. Sometimes there was also financial reasons why they couldn't move to the cloud. So, for instance, a lot of customers have invested big amounts of dollars in building out data centers that were amortized over 10, 15, 20 years. That they really can't move out of the cloud easily from a financial perspective. And the other big reason why people are hesitating to move to the cloud is because sometimes it's a data sovereignty or data governance issue where they can't put data or services in a cloud based on regulatory requirements or compliance requirements, or the control plane needs to reside within certain areas of the world and is prohibited from being publicly accessible, right? So there's other reasons besides the technologies that sometimes limit folks' ability to go directly to the cloud.
Yeah, so why don't we, those are all great points. Why don't we step back a second and talk about what is NC2 on Azure? What are Nutanix Cloud Clusters? What does that really mean? Do either of you guys have insight into that? I have some general ideas, but either of you guys have more insight into that than I do?
I do. In fact, So, kind of from two different perspectives. So the first one being, listen, I don't work for Nutanix. I don't have a Nutanix cluster sitting in the back, that I can go pop in and look into. I watch as much YouTube about things as I do anything else. So, so going into Next, I knew a lot of this stuff at like an academic level outside of, I got a lot of customers who have been deploying on Acropolis in general for years. But walking into the Nutanix, like the vendor booth, and just walking in as a beginner all over again and going, hey guys, will you show me what this looks like? And having them take me through was kind of cool, actually. But, ultimately the idea is, today, when you think about it, when you're running workloads on premises, you're probably hosting them on vSphere. Maybe you're running, if you're a Nutanix customer, it's probably Acropolis. If you're a Citrix customer that's been doing this for years, it might be even XenTegra, Citrix Hypervisor. But ultimately, you got a tool stack that you're running on-prem, which, by the way, is very different than what you're running in Azure, right? So you log into Azure, you're learning the tooling around how to manage, Azure Resource Manager. You're figuring out how to run ARM. And by the way, if you go to AWS, you're doing the same thing. You got to learn the AWS stack,
right?
Which is completely different from Azure, which is completely different than your on-prem. So what Nutanix is doing with Nutanix Cloud Clusters is trying to sort of normalize that experience. You're running Acropolis across all three clouds, is what it is. So from one view, Prism, right, I have visibility into all of my three different clouds. I can manage workloads from one vantage point. I hate to say one pane of glass, but I can orchestrate from Prism to all three different types of locations, which is fantastic. So what that means is if I'm trying to build an application and I do it on premises, it makes it really easy to move that to Azure. It makes it really easy to move to AWS because I'm not having to retool the app or the workload because it's still running on Acropolis, which is pretty cool. Now, how that works in practice is different on AWS. So I think on AWS, it's bare metal. So I'm running Acropolis on bare metal AWS, instances. If I'm doing this in Azure, it works a little bit differently. So it's more of an integrated solution on top of Azure. But ultimately, as an IT professional, I don't need to care, right? Because at the end of the day, I'm just looking at Prism, and Acropolis manages the workloads however it works. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's interesting because, well, you said something I wasn't aware of, Geremy. So I probably would have said it wrong. I'm glad you went first. So I think my understanding of NC2 on Azure was that it was a mirror, if you will, not a mirror, but a very similar deployment to NC2 on AWS. In other words, it was running on bare metal, but that's apparently not the case. However, from the standpoint of an administrator or an engineer at a customer, it looks the same. In other words, one of the big advantages, as I understand it, is the ability to essentially move workloads in real time from one location to the other, kind of in the vein of like XenMotion or vMotion we could do between the same cluster on premises. This is a very similar process and does not require the reconfiguration of the workload or refactoring of the workload in terms of having to pull drivers out and inject new drivers and that sort of thing, because it's the same platform.
So let me just clarify one thing, because I did go into the booth and ask this, right? I wanted to know, by the way, what do they call it when you call it vMotion or XenMotion? What is it called in the Acropolis world?
That's a good question.
So we're going to call it A-motion right now because I don't know what to call it.
Right.
We'll fix this. We'll fix this on next week's podcast. But ultimately,
I think it's migrate VMs or something. Something generic. Yeah.
So I did ask the question: can I sort of do that live motion across, on premises to cloud? And the answer was there is a little bit of downtime. So it's not kind of like vMotion where the user or no one knows. There's a little bit of downtime that takes, it mirrors it over to the other side, probably does a mirror of the mirror, to get the deltas until there's an off and on. I think some of that just has to do with just the response time. It's got to be super low to be able to pull something off like that. Easy to do in the data center. Between data centers, it becomes a little harder. So as far as I know, there is some kind of downtime, although it's not a lot. And to your point, you're not having to refactor your workload, which is a really big deal. Yep.
Right. So that gives us a good baseline of what NC2 is. So as far as the blog article itself indicates, why use NC2 with Citrix. So the first item here, I'll let one of you guys, I'll just toss it out there. Easily expand on-premises Citrix workloads to the cloud.
Yeah, and I can chime in on that one because a lot of times what we're seeing a lot of customers do is they're using the cloud as a way to burst out additional capacity or to do some type of testing. That's their first kind of foray into the cloud, right? I need to do some testing. I don't want to go out and build out an environment with physical hardware. Hey, the cloud provides some real great resources. Cloud also provides some great resources for disaster recovery cases like this. So with NC2 and Citrix, really it starts with that. It's got to be easy to enable those, take those on-premise workloads and migrate them over to the cloud very easily, especially the Citrix workloads. And that was kind of the starting point, right? So how do we make sure that that works, and how do we make sure that works seamlessly? Well, the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that the tools are set up and the administrative processes are as simple as possible so that you don't have to give up something to make this work.
Right. So the next item, well, before I do that, Geremy, any comments on that? Section?
So let me look at this. There's a something I chatted with an architect while I was there that might fall into this bucket the best. So, we talk about being able to expand on-premises workloads. We're talking Citrix here, but just generally speaking, take on-premises workloads and expand those out to the cloud. One of the Nutanix architects told me this, and I thought it was pretty fascinating, is just given the supply chain challenges that we've got right now, the idea is, well, in some cases, I need to roll out new clusters, but I don't have the hardware yet. So he used this phrase called cloud start, which is, what if you could start in the cloud and then move it back, right? So I need to roll out new users like right now. I need to scale out or expand, but I don't have the hardware. What if I started in the cloud with this new use case, and as I get the hardware in and I add that to my on-premises cluster, I can migrate those users back, which is kind of a different thought, right? Because again, it's the same platform. You're moving these folks around however you need to. Why not start in the cloud and just move it when you need it? Yeah,
that's a really interesting concept, and it kind of plays really well into the next item here, which is effortlessly scale with additional nodes. This gives you the ability to really quickly scale up with additional nodes just by adding a node. And this is kind of going back to the early days of Nutanix. That's kind of, when they first came out as an offering, one of the value props there was the ability to, you stand up a three node cluster. Let's say you can get we'll throw a number out there. Say you can get 300 users per node. You wanted to add 300 more users, you just add another node. You wanted to add 600 users, you add two nodes. I mean, in theory. So it's scaled in a linear way. But what's interesting about this is it talks about that same concept, but being able to do it in the cloud, and where you can expand it seamlessly up to 16 nodes, but then scale it down, which kind of weighs into your argument there, Geremy, about the ability to go both up and back, if you will. And that's really an interesting advantage of this. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, your on-prem clusters, I'm not going to say they're a sunk cost, because I think in a lot of cases there is on-prem subscriptions that make that look a little different now. But listen, when you're running in the cloud and when you've got it turned on, you're paying the ticker. Anything you can do to turn workloads off, suspend them, whatever you can do to turn that that faucet off is awesome. So the fact that you can do that from both a Nutanix perspective, as well as Citrix using autoscale, I mean, it's pretty slick.
Yep. And then moving to the next one, I'm not trying to rush through this, but save on cloud infrastructure costs. This kind of plays into what you just said too, Geremy. You're very forward looking here.
It's like I'm staring at this. I didn't mean to do that, but I totally did that.
But this is interesting because this is not something that I think you can natively do easily. In certain clouds, to be able to do hibernate and resume. I know that there's at least one cloud that does suspend, resume very, very easily, but this gives you the ability to put the clusters on hold when capacity is not required, and then resume them when necessary. So, Todd, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think this is kind of where everyone's trying to get to,
right?
Is the ability to control not only the costs but also the performance. And there's a big difference between hibernate and suspend, right? In both of those are different than turning off, right? So if I need to spin up something from a dead stop, it's going to take me considerably more time and resources to do that versus, take something out of hibernation or taking out of a suspend mode, right? So there's cost associated with that. But there's also the time and effort, right? If we're talking in a specific industry like healthcare, as an example, precious seconds matter, and they don't want to have to wait, right? There was an entire segment of the software industry that deals with, optimizing performance, and this is just another instance where, that technology is coming into play.
Yeah, it's interesting that this section of the article reflects kind of something that I'm very familiar with, and that is things being left on by my kids, mostly lights, not television, but and this concept of being able to scale back or hibernate workloads and save costs, but then give you kind of the same level of agility, or at least a close level of agility in terms of being able to spin them back up, much more quickly than, like you said, Todd, from a dead state or a deallocated state in Azure. So certainly an advantage. When I first read this, just scanning it, I was thinking, okay, so you can suspend and resume or hibernate and resume VMs, but this is talking about putting whole clusters on hold. That's a whole different ballgame there.
Well, think about it. Now you're talking about cost savings at scale.
Yes.
Scale of the data center in situations where it's going to make a huge difference on your costs if you can shut down an entire cluster versus individual VMs.
Exactly. Yeah. Interesting. I would imagine, and we don't really want to get into pricing, but I would imagine that suspending them doesn't suspend the cost, but probably reduces the cost for the time it's suspended. I would imagine something like that.
So yeah, so when you think about it, just thinking about how Azure works, right? So it's probably not deallocated, but just suspended. So there is some level of consumption that is reserved. What if you need to spin it back up? Like you don't have to wait on that. So
somebody else can grab it, and then you're not able to spin it back up in a really serious situation. That would be a problem.
Yeah. So I mean, there's definitely some questions there. Does it make sense to do that with a reserved instance of some kind? But I don't. Still trying to pick apart what that looks like. So.
Oh, I'm sure there'll be more to come for sure. This is very new. So the next item here, experience familiar administrative features. So the integration of CVAD or Citrix DaaS with Nutanix Clusters provides Nutanix customers with the same management experience. So same Prism interface from a Nutanix perspective, same Citrix DaaS interface can be used. And with respect to Nutanix, the same one on-prem versus using Nutanix clusters in Azure. Any thoughts on this, Geremy or Todd?
I'll tell you that out of curiosity, I went out to the Azure portal just to see it out there. So it's out there on the Azure Marketplace, which is awesome. So what that means is if you are if you have any sort of commit with Microsoft on Azure, it looks like this will probably ding that plan, so you can use up some of your consumption as you go.
Right. And it indicates that Nutanix customers can use their existing term licenses to get the consumption of the Nutanix software through the Azure Marketplace. So that makes it pretty simple for them to move into the cloud leveraging NC2 based on what this says.
Yeah, as I'm looking at this, it talks about how the payment frequency is $0 a month, and you're probably using your cluster licensing, which you already own. You can put on that cluster. So at that point, you're just paying for whatever the Azure consumption of this is. Yeah. No, this is very cool. So this is GA now. So I can clearly go out to the portal and grab it. Fully supported. So it's not like what does Nutanix call their, I'm going to use a Citrix word, but their tech previews. This isn't like early access is what they call it. So is this still early access or is this GA now?
I thought I saw it reference to GA, or maybe it said GA soon.
Yeah, there's a couple of references around PVS and MCS integration as well.
Yes, there is. Yeah, we skipped over that. Yeah. It says the plugin. It's the plugin for NC2 is available for early access and it currently works with MCS, and PVS is expected later this year.
Yeah.
Got it. So I guess the real point to this one as well is this has already been validated for the Citrix Ready program. So I did have a meeting with one of our internal architects, and he's been working pretty close on this joint solution. So it is validated. Like you said, it works with MCS today, and I think later this year, PBS will be supported too, which is what you just said. But that's pretty slick. You know what? Here's the real question, though. As much as I love PBS, Bill, what you know about Nutanix and the shadow copy clones that kind of come with it, MCS is an awesome solution on Nutanix.
It is an awesome solution. And I know there were a lot of, we've done most of the projects we've done with Nutanix have been MCS. I believe we've had, trying to remember if they ended up staying with it. I think they did. We had one where they leveraged the PVS with an on-premises cluster. But as the way Nutanix is designed, it really lends itself to MCS as where that makes sense from a performance perspective and a management perspective. You don't have as much infrastructure required as you do with PVS, and because of the shadow copy clones and the data locality, you don't really get a performance hit, or at least not much of one, if any, with MCS. So most customers are either pivoting from PVS on premises to MCS on Nutanix. We have a couple that have continued to leverage PVS, largely because I think they're familiar with it, they're comfortable with it. And one benefit of PVS is if you want to go back from, your one image to the image previously, it's really just a reboot. There's not a lot of orchestration that needs to go on in the background. It's really just stupid simple.
So being very cognizant of the fact that Todd came from Ardent's and has got a special place in his heart for it. It's an interesting conversation in Nutanix, although I will say this, because image portability has been a big topic for on-premises customers moving to the cloud. So if you're an existing PVS customer running on Nutanix, it's pretty easy because your image does not need to, again, be refactored for PVS in the cloud whenever that goes live. It's just easily you can move those images over. The rollback is super nice, right? So being able to just roll back almost instantly is a huge selling factor. But I got to imagine, the other piece of that is just being able to move those PVS images, out to a cluster sitting in Azure or AWS for that matter. Yep. That's pretty powerful as well.
Yeah, very powerful.
And that's that's obviously one of the things that's been out there is understanding that PVS and MCS are both going to be around for a while. And the fact that image portability service is really that game changer. It's the link between that and being able to say, I can take that same image and use it in PVS or MCS, and I can use it on a variety of different cloud platforms as well. It really eliminates that blocker that a lot of people have, whether it be real or kind of in their mind, is that, I'm going to have to go and rebuild my entire environment just to be able to support these new resources.
Yeah, and the portability again, and I think this is what you're saying, Todd, is when you think about today, if you've got an on-premises CVAT environment or you've got a Citrix DaaS environment with the on-premises workloads, and you want to put those in Azure or in AWS or GCP for that matter, those images have to be essentially converted, or what we would probably recommend is that you build them new. If you're taking an image on-prem, a traditional image on-prem, and putting it even MCS in Azure, you'd want to build it in Azure to make sure that you're not going to have any issues. Same for AWS, same for GCP. Whereas in this instance, like you said, you don't really have to do that because it's the same underlying environment in theory across all clouds.
Absolutely.
All right, Bill, you got me chasing down did I make that stuff up around bare metal or not in Azure? So next week we'll validate it, but I am looking at a slide. In fact, this is one of the slides we presented at the partner session. It's the Monica, who's joined us on the on the podcast before, has called this slide the Nutanix hamburger, because it's got it's got Prism, it's got Citrix, it's got the Nutanix in the middle, and then all your different locations. And it does say EC2, which is AWS, is bare metal,
right?
And then it says additional public clouds, because again, these could be private clouds, but Microsoft Azure in particular. But we'll get an answer on that, because I'm pretty sure EC2 is bare metal, and I think it's native Azure. Goodness.
Well, I spent very little time because of meetings and other things in the exhibit hall last week, so I didn't get a chance to go around and talk to them. So I'd be inclined to say that There's probably some differences there because I know that Nutanix and Azure took their time getting into getting NC2 into the cloud, and I think that was on purpose. So I suspect there are some differences, some advantages and differences between that approach, their approach there, and to other clouds. So,
you know what? So to your point about being busy, I was busy all week as well. But I did get a short window of time where I did go into the vendor village, and I got to go see. Obviously, I went to the Citrix one. You got to go high five your own guys and gals. But I did go into the Nutanix one, and of course, it just touched a lot of different things. And I just remember thinking, man, I missed this. I remember walking into the vendors and just having them tell me what it is new, because you kind of miss that. And most of them have a really good demo, which is really cool to see. Yeah. And I got to be, if I'm being transparent, I went into the Citrix booth doing the same thing. There were things that, listen, I get so busy, I kind of miss some things. So sometimes there are certain things that I haven't seen yet as a Citrix employee that it was kind of good to get in front of the product manager or whoever's presenting to have them take me through it. So I miss that.
I was in there but I actually got a chance to finally meet Monica in person. So but I didn't get any demos because it was early in the morning, and she did give me a T-shirt that unfortunately I left in one of the break rooms. So I have to score that some other time. So, all right. Anyways, I think we've covered this pretty fully. Any of you guys have any other final closing comments?
No, I think I think the one comment that Calvin put in at the very end here is, contact your Citrix and Nutanix partner. And ironically, with XenTegra, you've got one phone call to make.
That's right.
So obviously, you can reach out to XenTegra to hear about both Citrix and Nutanix, as well as a couple of other vendors out there, to really kind of put this all together. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to today, Bill.
For sure. Thank you, Todd. Yeah, we've got a lot of experience, consultants, solution architects around both of these stacks, and can definitely help customers understand the options here and what the requirements are, and get them into it if they want to. So reach out to your local XenTegra CE, and if you don't know who that is, reach out to me and I'll tell you. Okay. Geremy, any final parting thoughts?
You know what? I think I've run my mouth enough. So
all good. All right. Thanks so much, guys. We'll talk to you again next week.
All right. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Todd.
See you guys.